Well, let's talk geopolitical tensions and ramifications because it's key. This so-called, what's being called now a Cold War between the US and China. Alex Tureman from Bondi Partners is in Washington for us with the latest. Alex, pleasure to have you on the program. What is the sense over there when it comes to US versus China? Because here at home, we're somewhat in the middle, and certainly we're in a war of words of our own with China now. But how's it looking there between the US and China?
Well, Ingrid, thanks so much for having me on. It's a really great question. I'm not breaking any news here if I let you know that U.S.-China relations have been pretty tense over the past 3 years or so. If you look at the country's transparency around the virus, if you look at human rights issues, if you look at the latest developments between China and Hong Kong, it's safe to say that Washington and Beijing are not on the same page on a lot of issues. But in order to really understand the relationship, you got to understand that it begins and ends with trade. It's been 3 difficult years under the China-U.S. trade war from a trade perspective, but we had a little daylight in January around the Phase 1 deal, which was primarily an agriculture and energy commodities trade deal. But regardless of all the good talk on both sides, China's purchases are down 23.5% from 2019. They're $21.2 billion behind schedule under the trade deal. And even though their agricultural purchases are up, it's still below the numbers that are outlined within the deal.
So, how does this play out? And obviously it's anyone's guess, but you've got Larry Kudlow overnight saying, that the US is miffed with China, and that's a quote. You've got China not backing down either. They made it very clear they're not backing down. So, if you're at this sort of stalemate, what happens next?
Well, you see the US has been highlighting potentially securitizing some of their supply lines, as well as critical industries like semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, emerging technologies. So I think we're going to continue to see a ratcheting up of this sort of language. But all of those global incidents, be it Hong Kong or Uyghurs or the South China Sea, are going to play a factor in this.
Yeah, and you've got Donald Trump saying he'll take some sort of action. He'll announce action on China before the week is over. That's the report that we're hearing out of Bloomberg. So he'll announce action on China before the week is over. What sort of impact does this have on the US, though? Because it's not necessarily a positive for the US, is it?
No, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of family farms in the Midwest have shut down over the course of this trade war. Just look at dairy farms in Wisconsin and Michigan and Iowa, soybean farmers, etc. Pork. It's not going to have a positive impact. All it means is consumer goods are increased, and at a time when we really need the consumer to be spending, it's not good to have those sorts of household goods more expensive for folks.
All right, so looking at the economic recovery in the US, we heard from Jamie Dimon overnight from JP Morgan, and he was saying he thinks the recovery could be quicker. The odds are looking good for a quick recovery, he said. Is there a silver bullet? Is this the way you see it?
The only silver bullet that I see is a vaccine. We are currently in the stabilization phase of the recovery in the US, in Australia, globally. The second phase of this is going to have to be ensuring that consumers have not only safety around whether or not they're able to spend, but also health safety. So it's going to be extremely important to get the turtle out of its shell, so to speak, because you got to remember that 60% of economic growth in the US, Australia, G20 countries is dependent on household spending. And then there's going to have to be a final phase of this recovery, or at least the third phase of this recovery, which is going to consist of growth phases. So I think that's going to be infrastructure spending on shovel-ready projects, as well as reinvestments in R&D and STEM education.
Alex, an election year in the US, obviously we're all very well aware of that. Mapping out some scenarios, I guess, from your point of view, what would a Joe Biden administration mean for, say, global markets and also for business?
Well, a Joe Biden administration, from a business perspective, I think would include a very high floor. I think you're going to see less trade tensions, less trade whiplash. You're going to see an increase in multilateral agreements, and ultimately, you're going to see those investments in infrastructure and R&D, which he's referenced during his campaign. So, regardless of whomever's in the Oval Office in 2021, faced a daunting task. But as Winston Churchill said, if you're going through hell, keep going.
Well, that's a good place to end the interview, Alex. I love a good quote. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today. Of course, so much to talk about, so much to discuss. We'll look forward to chatting with you next week.